Today, I'm going to explain a horror movie called Faceless. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens on a beautiful night in Paris as the City of Lights gears up for Christmas. Renowned plastic surgeon Dr. Frank Flamand is totally drenched in the holiday spirit as he enjoys the night with his sister Ingrid and his lover/assistant Natalie. They roam around the city's markets, shop in high-end stores, and have a great time together. The trio then chat happily and make their way to the underground parking where they left their car earlier. Suddenly, a gray Mercedes comes to a screeching halt right in front of them. A middle-aged woman then disembarks from the car and sarcastically greets Dr. Flamand. The doctor has no idea who she is, but the lady does have a prominent scar under her left eye. She then introduces herself as Dr. Flamand's previous patient. Turns out something went wrong during her recovery process, and now her entire face is botched. The lady is extremely angry and wants to take revenge on Dr. Flamand, so she takes out the bottle of acid that she had been hiding in her sleeve and throws its contents towards the surgeon. Ingrid, who is standing nearby, manages to push her brother out of harm's way, but unfortunately, the acid falls on her face instead, corroding off all of her skin. A horrified Dr. Flamand and Natalie are left helpless as they watch the psycho woman drive away with a smug smile. The scene shifts to a year later as poor Ingrid wakes up screaming in her bed. She has been having flashbacks of that night ever since the incident occurred. Dr. Flamand soon arrives to comfort his sister and promises that he will restore her beauty by any means necessary. Elsewhere in Paris, an American model, Barbara Muller, is busy shooting for a high-end luxury brand. The chief designer of the event, Marshall, reminds Barbara to flaunt her jewelry. She is currently wearing an extremely expensive gem-encrusted gold bracelet. The shoot goes on for a while, after which the designer calls for a short break as it is incredibly hot inside. Just then, Natalie arrives at the scene and gestures at Barbara to come out for a while. The two women then greet each other warmly, which indicates that this isn't the first time they are meeting. They quickly sneak into Natalie's car, where she gives the model a small box full of cocaine. It is then revealed that Natalie regularly supplies Barbara with such drugs. After taking 2 strong snorts, the latter closes her eyes and relaxes a bit. This is when a man from the back seat suddenly gags her mouth while Natalie injects her with a tranquilizer. Back at the shoot, Marshall is pissed when he realizes that Barbara hasn't come back from the break. He asks about her, and some models reveal that they had seen her leave the studio with a blonde woman. In the meantime, we get to see the real personality behind the usually charming and handsome Dr. Flamand. He runs a private hospital in the outskirts of a city named St. Cloud. It appears like any other specialist institute from the outside, but beneath the facade of normality, there are some twisted and extremely dark secrets hidden there. It is revealed that Dr. Flamand gathers the blood, hormones, skin, and glands of young women and uses them in the plastic surgery of his rich clients. The patients, nurses, and other staff do not know about this terrifying secret. Only Natalie and a mute security guard named Gordon are privy to the truth. In fact, they actively participate in abducting young and vulnerable women from different parts of Paris and bring them to this hospital. Once these girls are brought in, they are forcibly thrown in the basement. Dr. Flamand then takes their blood and whatever else is necessary for the treatment of his rich patients. After this, the poor girls are killed off as they're no longer useful. In the meantime, Barbara has also been locked in the basement of the hospital. Turns out Dr. Flamand wants to use her facial skin to treat his sister. We also get a display of the brute nature of the hospital's mute security guard, Gordon. He is not afraid to mutilate or even kill any of the several girls that are kept in the hospital's basement. Meanwhile, Dr. Flamand goes for a round to check up on his patients. Most of his clients are old women who are extremely happy with his treatment. However, there is a middle-aged British woman, Mrs. Sherman, who seems to be unnerved by something. She even tells Flamand that she can feel there is something wrong going on in the hospital, but the surgeon dismisses her concerns and tells her that she will be back to her best in less than 2 weeks. Elsewhere in New York, business tycoon Brian Wallace is worried about his daughter Barbara. He is a veteran from the Vietnam War and has connections all over the world. He came to know that his daughter hadn't checked into her hotel room in Paris for the last 2 days. Even the local police seemed to be completely clueless as to her whereabouts. Thus, Brian decides to hire a private detective, Sam Morris, who also happens to be Barbara's ex-boyfriend. The businessman hands Sam $20,000 in advance and a plane ticket to Petty. He then asks that his daughter be located by any means necessary. A few hours later, Sam reaches Paris and checks into the same hotel where Barbara was supposedly staying. He bribes the receptionist and takes all the letters that were supposed to be delivered to her. Shortly afterwards, Sam meets with the head of the local police at a mortuary. It is revealed that the French cops had found the dead body of a young girl that was thrown in a dark alley last night. The corpse doesn't have a head, which makes identifying the victim nearly impossible. However, Sam checks the pubic area and immediately concludes that the body doesn't belong to Barbara. He then cheekily reveals that she had a mole near her private area. Weird time to be acting like a pervert. Back at the hospital, Flamand is going through an emotionally tumultuous time. Ingrid is getting more and more irritable with each day, demanding that he fix her face as soon as possible. Flamand, on the other hand, reveals that he cannot operate on her because he fears that he will make a mistake. After a long thought, he comes to the conclusion that the only person he can ask for help from is Dr. Orlaf, a renowned surgeon who has now retired. Thus, a few days later, Flamand and Natalie arrive at Dr. Orlaf's villa. The old surgeon asserts that he is now retired, and the last person he had operated on was his own wife, but he does tell them about a man named Dr. Karl Heinz, who might be able to help them. Turns out Heinz was a Nazi scientist who ran grafting experiments on live captured soldiers. His methods were extremely brutal, inhumane, but effective. Heinz even managed to transform the lives of soldiers whose faces were blown off during World War II. However, when the war ended, Heinz fled to Spain and has been living there ever since. Flamand asks Orlaf to establish contact with this Nazi doctor so that he can help them. Back at the hospital, Gordon is creepily watching Barbara through the tiny window in her basement cell. She is an extremely beautiful woman who is in a very vulnerable state. Gordon decides to take advantage of this situation and goes inside the cell. He tries to force himself on Barbara, but she fights back. Eventually, the brute smacks her so hard across the face that she falls on the bed. He then physically abuses her, completely ignoring the damage that he has done to her face. Later, when Flamand and Natalie return to the hospital, they notice that Barbara's face has several deep bruises. This means that they cannot use her skin for the plastic surgery, and now will have to search for another girl. Shortly afterwards, an enraged Natalie finds Gordon in his room and confronts him. She tells him that he made a grave mistake by hurting the patient's face. So, as punishment, he is sent to Ingrid's room and forced to make love with her. What the hell is this? Early the next morning, Flamand gets a call from Mrs. Sherman, who sounds extremely worried. She reveals that she has discovered several unnerving facts about his hospital. The poor woman thinks that Flamand has no idea about the shady things that are happening there and wants to inform him about it. The surgeon also plays along and reassures her that he will arrive as soon as possible. However, a few hours later, when there's a knock at Mrs. Sherman's door, it is Natalie who has arrived instead. The middle-aged woman quickly realizes that she has fallen into a trap and tries to run away, but Natalie plants a syringe in her eyes and immediately kills her. After this, she steals the poor woman's necklace, indicating that she has a sadistic hobby of collecting souvenirs from her victims. That afternoon, Flamand receives good news as Dr. Heinz agrees to help him operate on his sister's case. This, however, means that they will have to quickly find a new woman, as Barbara still has deep bruises on her face. Later that night, Flamand and Natalie head to a famous bar in Paris to scan for potential victims. They come across Melissa, a call girl who just so happened to be Flamand's former patient. He then pays her to come back to his villa, and Melissa readily agrees. She doesn't realize that she is walking into a trap that she won't be able to come out of. On the other hand, Sam continues his investigation, which leads him to the home of fashion designer Marshall. The latter initially refuses to give any information about Barbara, but Sam starts getting aggressive, which forces Marshall to reveal everything he knows. He explains that Barbara had left with a blonde during one of his photo shoots. He also shows the photo of the expensive gem-encrusted bracelet that Barbara had been wearing. Upon hearing this, Sam is convinced, so he takes the photograph and heads back to his hotel room. Elsewhere, Melissa arrives at Flamand's villa and immediately starts cozying up to him, but this is when he injects her with tranquilizers that temporarily knock her out. Melissa wakes up later inside the surgery room where Dr. Heinz, Flamand, and Natalie are looking at her. She can see what's going on, but cannot feel or react to anything. Seconds seconds later, Dr. Hines begins the procedure and starts cutting Melissa's face. Everything seems to be going normally, until the tissue joining her facial muscles with her skin begins to rapidly disintegrate. Before anyone can do anything, the entirety of the skin is destroyed, and the whole surgery is now useless. Gordon then severs Melissa's head and disposes of her body like a maniac. Following this botched surgery attempt, Ingrid's mental health begins to rapidly deteriorate. She has locked herself in her room ever since the accident and is now desperate to be loved by a man. While Flamand promises to solve her problems immediately, Natalie goes out to the streets of Paris. There, she finds a male prostitute and brings him back to the villa. She hands him some money and tells him to go make love to Ingrid. Everything goes smoothly at first, as Ingrid is wearing a mask to hide her deformed face. But as they continue to make love, the male prostitute yanks her face mask away. Ingrid screams in horror, but before the man can say anything, Natalie sneaks up on him and punctures his neck with a pair of scissors. The following day, Flamand and Natalie once again head out, this time to a famous discotheque in Paris. They quickly find their next victim, a B-grade actress who has hit a slump in her career. Flamand then uses his charm, as usual, to convince the actress to come to his villa. Once the trio gets back, Flamand immediately starts getting close to her. He then tells her to undress while he makes a drink for them. The actress happily obliges, but when he comes back, he has a tranquilizer syringe in his hands. The scene quickly shifts to the basement where Natalie is busy manipulating Barbara. She tells the poor girl to reveal her credit card PIN number. In return, she promises to help her escape from this hellhole. Barbara falls for this trap and readily gives her the PIN number, and as expected, Natalie simply ties her arms and walks away without fulfilling the promise. But this is where the usually meticulous Natalie slips up. She goes out and uses the credit card with carelessness. As a result, Barbara's father can easily see the details of the money being debited. He promptly informs Sam that someone has been using Barbara's credit card from a small town named St. Cloud. That very evening, Sam traces the credit card expenditures to Dr. Flamand's hospital. He immediately heads there and questions the renowned surgeon about Barbara's whereabouts. Flamand uses all of his experience to convince the detective that there is nothing wrong going on, but just as Sam is about to leave, he notices Natalie. She is wearing the exact same gem-encrusted bracelet that Barbara had been wearing, which she went missing. After returning from the hospital, Sam checks the photographs of the bracelet that he had obtained from Marshall. This confirms his suspicions, and he decides to return to the hospital. On the other hand, Dr. Hines, Flamand, and Natalie manage to remove the actress's face and successfully graft it to Ingrid's skin. They have finally managed to complete their mission after several botched attempts. In the meantime, Sam returns to the hospital and sneaks into the basement. He is quickly ambushed by Gordon, but the detective is skilled enough to fight back. A skirmish then breaks out between the two, but Sam overpowers and kills Gordon. Following this, he quickly checks the various prism-like cells in the basement. He eventually locates Barbara in one of them and enters her cell using the keys he stole from Gordon. Unfortunately, as the two are embracing each other, Natalie arrives there and quietly locks them in the cell. The following morning, Flamand discusses this matter with Dr. Hines, while also celebrating their successful surgery. The murder victims have piled up in the hospital's basement, and sooner or later the authorities will close in. Thus, Dr. Hines advises them to run away from France, leaving Barbara and Sam alive in their cells. As the movie comes to an end, the couple is left to die in the cell. However, it is revealed that the detective had sent Barbara's father a message before he came to the hospital. In it, he had said that if he doesn't leave a message in 12 hours, a police force is to be sent to the hospital. Subscribe for more videos like this.